a slippery slope for that.
I tried to take pictures like what.
You do?
Not that I know of.
Okay.
I would say probably the state police, if anybody.
Oh, that's a good idea.
John Anderson,
Contract
I think
runs out
hooked me up with someone
in
at the
February.
Drug Enforcement Agency. I don't know how.
That's what I said, I said, you
His
need to
first
sell your
text was
house.
hilarious. You come to the drug
I said,
kingpin to
here's
learn
what
about
you
this.
guys do. Lower your price, you're gonna need
That's
to
funny.
really, and so.
I tried to play
yeah,
along,
I've
but
really
he just,
learned a lot.
I think he thought I was actually being mean. He said, please just answer the question, no judgment on how you obtain this info.
Isn't it true if you clean it up and properly remediate, it's not disposable,
No.
right?
Right.
You want
If
some
you do,
motivation?
if you do it the way EPA says to do it, which I have no idea what that is, I think removing gravel, removing
Yeah,
anything.
it's
else.
very,
Well, that's what I'll be doing for my investor and you will be doing this.
Yeah.
It's new, listen.
Oh, that's
Yeah, I
Yeah, I would-
already.
That'd be helpful.
Thanksgiving.
Still want
Even
someone
if
to
they
walk
don't
up.
register,
Power
they
out,
know.
flew out of
Yeah.
the box, and so we have to be
Yeah, I
able
just want
to.
someone to walk up and be like,
Yeah.
hey, like,
Well, that's right.
or hey, can I get into that wall right there? Because I know, like
Yeah,
that,
right.
I would just be like, oh,
Yeah, oh my gosh.
that's a killer for me.
These pictures.
I would have no motivation to continue the renovation.
I ended that in my house.
Well,
One of my houses once.
Just schools up out there.
Yeah, do you
Clean
remember
it up,
Danielle
fix it up,
Sutherland?
and
Yeah,
turn
her
it
husband
around,
did
then
it.
you taking a
And I'm gonna
break
give
from
him a
the.
shout out on,
Absolutely, I'm totally on board there, but then,
Yeah,
you know,
if
like,
you start peeling walls back and finding stuff.
so,
it's so, actually, if you haven't seen the system,
no, we got that at,
there are holes in
We
every,
were telling Eric.
Really?
Yeah.
it seems like
Has it been abandoned or folks still want that?
virtually like
Yeah.
that.
I'm constantly amazed.
Oh, you can't quite tell because
So
they've covered a lot
they
of it up.
special ordered it, I could let you know, but the guy who came through was phenomenal. I have the names of all the contractors. But,
You can see the big
and
gravel
this,
over
this
some.
one has no seals, like it opens both ways.
I don't know, I'm
Push
using
it in.
Scott's website.
Oh,
Where is it?
We
it's
need
Wolf
like-
Street, across Wolf Street,
So
Granite.
thanks, these,
Just listen.
Factory.
Yeah, I guess. I'm gonna say.
that we ordered.
Zach's
we
friend
ordered
here, he
business
said
and
he
he
wants
was
to
like,
Graham,
Are you in construction? Is it?
I had to turn off his VPN.
I was just showing her.
What, what was the latest you've been over 3 year earnings, HP?
It's not a matter.
Oh, so it doesn't matter.
It is.
Just go ahead and set it up.
Looking back,
Did any of those things?
there's a house.
Yeah, I didn't try the MagLink. I tried
The
the
other one
Asus
did?
first and it worked too.
Until Windows 10 machines, I didn't get it to work for some reason. I don't know what disk it was.
How are you?
Yeah, good.
They actually did,
Did they dispose it? Or?
Yeah.
For remediation of disclosure.
Oh, it's only been a couple days.
actually, remember like 5 years ago? I think
I
it was the
just
first
came
year
in and I
when
looked at my
DEA guy
box.
came. He used that house as an example of its remediation stuff. And I was like, yep, that's my neighbor's house.
For my client in June. I'm like, why is
So, the neighbors across the
You never
street bought
get
it,
it.
and they've just been like storing
I guess.
all their equipment. For 5 years. Yeah, that's right.
So I'm supposed
Oh,
to.
good. Cheryl.
Yeah, I don't know.
Join us?
I mean, it was.
No, not on this one. But it's, I mean, it's pretty thorough. He put the house in.
So why is he not looking this one? What does he know that you don't know?
No, nothing, unfortunately. He just didn't want to. He was kind of the one that helped the
Yeah.
seller kick out the scratchers that have been there for 20 years. So he's kind of got
Well, you knew she'd be the judge.
legal process and didn't want to be good. More involved. Yeah. Yeah, he wanted to do it. He's got 2 other projects on the.
What's it worth done?
I was gonna say,
It's 3
hopefully
one.
somebody's getting down there. This morning I was out with my daughter, feeding
It's
apples.
really nice, yeah.
I'm like throwing apples.
You put
I
a
cut one
in the
up.
back of the machine.
No, that just walking back and forth. So it's like 900 square feet. 180 would be $200 square foot, and I mean, he listed his for $269. Already has 3 offers, so that's amazing. Right next door.
I
That's Shenandoah, all of those. Derek's got one of those. And
I
they're
haven't
all like,
updated any of my
oh, this
stuff.
is on high school.
The Wolf has been,
So when you have the
West,
closing
yeah.
on the 27th, what are we supposed to do to walk for Christmas Eve? Day after Christmas?
Yeah.
Well, what day is that, Monday?
So it's down, is it on the north side of West Wolf?
It's right next to the
Yeah.
apartments up front.
So it's Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you could do the morning before, right, the 26th.
Okay, the stone ones that are
I've
on
got
the.
that document signed, I just need to get it to you.
It's all good, it's not really bad.
Yeah. There's some big stuff, some refencing there. How they took out all the trees. So it's really nice, it's like a very large thing back.
You wanna know about that?
I didn't do it as close.
Well, what time is your closing? Because I'm doing mine the same day as my closing.
If you're gonna do a late at home.
But we'll see what this guy says. John's contact.
I'll be.
that's what I've heard people
It's
say.
just like,
I don't know.
Christmas Eve, I'm like, I can't.
There's,
You wanna walk through?
You're like, I'm not
Yeah, the whole family is coming. I'm sorry. That's what I mean. Yes. Hey, can you tilt that little picture up on the right? You're just closer to it. Otherwise, I'll go and stand through this whole. Oh, that's so
Nope, too
better.
much.
Isn't it?
Too much?
Yeah, that's too much. Back it up and there you go, perfect.
Thank you. Sorry.
not at all. I'm the same way. Put it in the oven to warm it up.
Wow.
Food back here.
My mom had a bottle.
Yeah,
and
I-
was making it.
Don't worry,
I found it.
I got it, I found it.
Are you kidding?
I'm not a smart man, but I know where food is.
I would like to see how it's going. I know. Here's
smell it.
I called Dwayne. What did you do? Dwayne says, Dwayne, you're not bringing cookies already in there. So I don't want to interfere with Joanne.
Right.
Hers is much more bigger off the top, but
it didn't. Okay.
if it's free and it's on your table, we don't eat it.
We all have to freeze it.
Oh, you mean like. No, the answer is in the tumble. Okay. If they're being carried or something like that. Okay.
We'll start first here.
But you don't want to, somebody else is
Not quite there.
Because now there's like ice chunks of it, somebody else is frozen jab, it's like wash them, chunk them, and then whatever we want. When I froze the cherries and cut, I made sure they were mush, so whatever was frozen out, it's just cherry juice.
Do they all have meat on them?
Be careful. Extra water. Do your thing. Yeah, that was part of my feeling. Good. Good, I like it. I'll make your
Yesterday, all this, I don't know why, it really hit me. Yesterday, all of a sudden, I was like, oh, Christmas is in like 2 weeks. So between this and an 11 o'clock showing, I'm gonna be doing some
Tonight we will be decorating our Christmas tree for the third time.
That's right, that's for sure.
It will be a little bit easier this time, because in the first 2 times that it fell over, it smashed most of the glass in the roots.
Hey, you need this.
And especially all of the ones that were
Made
the
the,
same
made
height.
the, of course.
Oh, yeah.
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 Sugar cookies.
I know, I remember the first year I let Noah do some of like this really nice special tiny always no, but she dropped one. And I was going, okay, Trey.
So that's my motivation to get it all done before that.
Those types of things make me realize, okay,
Yeah.
Aldo's a really nice treasure.
The carnage was so bad the first time that we couldn't even identify a lot of the movements.
Is it like a Home Alone? Remember how in Home Alone 2 it's all the bathroom like breaks them all and puts them in the window area? This it was much worse.
Yes, there was a simultaneous smashing of trillions of little pieces
They're so ready and then you get in there and
Yeah.
of sparkly glass.
I remember one year the Christmas tree fell on my sister. Luckily it was not too horrible.
they have done
Is everything okay?
really are ready. And you guys now decide the tree.
I heard.
Probably get about 10 more people to show up.
No, the tree's out on the
I might. It's classic.
No, live trees have been banned.
It's funny, I do think
Did you, so is it, did you guys, so this, the one that fell over was the live tree or, okay. Did you guys give it somewhere?
that's ridiculous.
Morning. We've gone out and got a tree.
Did you go to Austin?
None of the little ones.
Because we got ours, I know they don't have many, we got ours in Austin. And we've learned how to look at one and realize, oh, we can cut that part off. And then this will actually be, and slap our angel on the top, and this will actually be fine. And we don't have a cut tall tree.
We've gotten a nice fraser at Home Depot. I guess the farms are growing them different now. They're growing them get taller faster. So they don't have a heavy base.
Yeah. We used to get like fishing line and attach it to the frame of windows all the time. After multiple years.
She's very professional. She did
My mom lived in her house at home once a year.
Too tall.
And then you're trying to figure out how to.
Yeah, but this time of year,
color.
Well, and every time they wrap your tree, we're putting it on your car, and every time we start sniffing, I think of
All right, good morning, everybody. Before we get started, I'd like to introduce a new agent. We have Crystal Bradley with us. Raise your hand, Crystal. Please make her feel welcome. She started with us yesterday.
welcome.
We're excited that you're here. We have bagels. Anne Marie brought a beautiful tray of Christmas cookies. So help yourself.
Okay. So some of you will remember if you were here in May that I did a tools camp on a similar topic. I think we called it personal IT management, but a lot of it was related to security. And we're going to do this again probably in about 6 months or so because it's that important. What I want to accomplish this morning is to impress upon you how vulnerable we all are to certain types of attacks, and you especially as realtors, how dangerous the internet can actually be. I want to make you, it's like, not to compare you to kids, but when you're teaching a kid to swim in the ocean for the first time, you want them to develop a healthy fear of the ocean. I want you to develop a healthy fear of the internet. So that you can both keep yourself safe and have educated conversations with your clients about this type of thing. So if anything ever comes up, you can handle it for them or prevent prevent it from happening in the first place. So for starters, something that you hear about from me pretty frequently is email scams. Right? These are some statistics, and I shared similar ones back in May, but these are updated numbers for the last year or so. 76% of organizations, meaning businesses mainly, from the data that I was pulling this from, have experienced phishing attacks in the last year. Phishing attack is an internet-based type of attack, and we'll get into it more later, where they try to get your information, passwords, that type of thing. The average user online, meaning someone who has an internet or who has an email account, receives 17 malicious emails per month. I think that's probably, I don't know, 20% of the malicious emails that a realtor would get a month, just because your email address is plastered all over the internet, for starters. 92.4% of malware is delivered via email. That number has gone up drastically over the last 5 years or so, because not necessarily antivirus programs, but just web browsers and operating systems themselves have gotten better at blocking websites with bad links and other forms of virus delivery systems. So it's coming through email mostly. Something to point out that they mentioned DocuSign lures are the most effective. For us, that's going to be .loop. I'll talk more about that kind of bait and switch scheme later too. But the kicker is that in 2019 so far, $35 million have been lost to internet scams. And that's just what we know about. So I mentioned phishing, and we use this word a lot, and people don't always know what it means, but the gist of it is that it's someone trying to get your information, whether that's your credit card information, your social security number, the password to your email account, the password to your online banking, whatever it is. Any information is useful to a hacker, even if it's just the name of the title agent on the deal that you're currently working. They can be phishing for that type of information. Which means that not every email that you get that is malicious is going to have a bad link or is going to have a virus attached to it. They're trying to trick you into giving them something. Some things to be on the lookout for, which I point out whenever one of these starts going around the office and you get one of those emails from me that says, yep, another email scam, don't click on this one. They're trying to promise you things, anything to get you to respond to them or click on their link or just engage with them in some way. All of these things here are red flags. The hover trick with hyperlinks, to hover your cursor over it, it'll tell you where the link goes. I'll show you examples of that later too, but there are things that you can do to identify these types of red flags. Something that I've said many times is that you should never hesitate to forward an email that you're unsure about to John or myself, and we'll check it out for you. Especially if it has to do with an active deal. We'll talk about wire fraud, but those are the ones without links are the ones that are sometimes the most dangerous. Social engineering. A lot of these words probably don't make sense yet, but social engineering is what we use to describe the behavior of these online criminals, and different ways that they can try to get information from you. I won't spend a whole lot of time of each of these. I'll have some more examples right after this, but I want to expose you to what all these different types of things are. Not so that you can memorize these words and go to your clients and say, now we need to be on the lookout for diversion theft, but so that you've seen it before, and if it comes across your plate, you'll be able to identify it or know that it's malicious. I can't tell you how many times someone asks me if something is a scam, and I'll tell them it is, and here's why, and they'll say, it never even occurred to me that someone would try to do that. So I want it to occur to you before you fall for it. Pretexting is how we describe an invented scenario. there was a scam that went around to several people here in the office a while ago after a Yahoo hack. A bunch of Yahoo passwords got leaked. And so these hackers had real passwords. So they would email you, assuming that you use that same password for other things, and they'd email you and they'd say, hey, I have your password, it's this. And if you are one of those people, like most are, who use the same password for multiple things, by the way, not a good idea, you're thinking, oh man, they have my password, this is real. And they say, not only do I have your password, I've used it to gain access to your entire computer, and I hacked your webcam and I recorded you watching that site that you weren't supposed to be watching. And whether you did or not, you're freaking out because you think they fabricated some video of you, and they threaten to share it to everyone on your contacts list because, or else unless you pay them. That's pretexting, and I mentioned that example specifically because at least 10 people here in the office got that email because they had a Yahoo account that got breached. Phishing, I mentioned before, it's kind of a broad term, but again, they're just trying to trick you into giving them information. Waterholing is when websites that you frequent are targeted specifically. This is usually a follow-up kind of scheme. If they can get into some aspect of your online profile and they know that you're always on the same recipe site and the same maps site for directions and the same sites for certain things, they can tailor an attack to you and start to impersonate your recipe site and send you a recipe that looks like it's from there, but then you click on it and it's what they want it to be. Quid pro quo describes a situation where they try to make you feel like you're getting something in return for clicking on their link or doing what you want them to do. So for example, they might impersonate me and email you and say, hey, I need to, we're pushing out an update, a security update to all the internet accounts at the office. I just need your email password, and then in about 30 seconds, send me your 2-factor code, and I'll update your account for you. And then they're in. A honey trap is more often used for real world scenarios, but that's when they try to just appeal to you directly. They offer you free money, or they show you pictures of vacations or whatnot, just to get you to click. Diversion theft is probably the most dangerous and the most common in real estate. And I'll take a minute here and talk about wire fraud in particular. We'll talk about it a little bit more later too. But for those of you who are unaware of how this works, and for some of you this will just be a refresher, but we're going to do this every 6 months because I don't want you to ever forget it. Wire fraud in real estate is a huge deal. This is why title agencies and banks and everyone are putting paragraph-long disclaimers at the bottom of their email to reduce their liability for this type of thing. But here's an example. One of your clients falls for a phishing scam. They've got an email account, it doesn't have 2-factor authentication on it, and they are not tech savvy, which is not to be held against them, but they fall for this scam, right? The hacker gets into your client's email account. You're corresponding with them, and just by being in their inbox, the hacker now knows who you are, who the agent and client on the other side of the deal are, who the title agent involved is, where the money's supposed to be going, when the closing is about to happen, all because they got into your client's inbox that you have no control over. Or maybe they even got into yours, but they're in this information loop. So they notice that the closing is about to come up, and they start creating some fake accounts to spoof the identity of people involved in the deal. So they start impersonating the client. They send an email to the title agent, and they say, hey, my bank asked me to get wiring instructions. They say I need to wire money for escrow. Title agent just hits reply to the email, writes back to the hacker thinking they're writing to your client, and they say, sure, here's your title, here's your wiring instructions. The hacker swaps out that account information for theirs, and then they make another spoof account. They start impersonating the title agent. And then they write to the client, who so far doesn't know anything about wiring instructions because no one has talked to them about it yet. And all of a sudden they get this email that looks like it's coming from the title agent that says, hey, it's time to wire the money. Here's your instructions. And the client just prints out the sheet, walks to the bank, and sends their money off to San Francisco, and then it's gone. Real story, by the way. That happened. Here. So that kind of thing is all because one person clicked one link and typed in their password. And then all that money's out the window. Spear phishing, to move on to the next one, is just a way that we talk about phishing attacks that are targeted. It implies that some research has been done, and the attack is formulated to an organization or even one specific person. Baiting is similar to the honey trap scenario, where they're dangling something in front of you, but it's not always a positive. For example, they could impersonate Carl or Keith and then send out an email to all the ClineMace staff titled Q1 layoff plan. And everyone's going to click on that pretty quick. So that's the kind of thing that we talk about with baiting scams. Tailgating is another real world scenario. It's not as big of an issue for us, but could be. It's more on the list when you're dealing with corporate offices or banks. When someone tries to impersonate a real life identity or just gain physical access by knowing when your deal is happening and coming in with you. And then rogue software is software that doesn't do what it says it does. A good example is a program called MacKeeper that isn't as popular now, but a few years ago was very popular among Mac users, and it would install itself everywhere and was really hard to get rid of. And it advertised itself as an antivirus program that would clean up your computer and keep things running smooth. And then they obviously had a premium version that you could pay for that was even better. But in reality, all it did was cause problems and then appear like it fixed them. That's what we call rogue software. And it's not always just a virus delivery method. Sometimes they really just want $20 a month from you because they can trick you into paying. So let's look at some real examples. Here's an email that looks like it came from PayPal. This is probably something that would be most effective in what we would call a spear phishing attack, when the hacker has determined that this person is a PayPal user. Whether they run a business that uses it or they just pay for things often through PayPal, someone who wouldn't be surprised to see an email that looks like this. The way around it, the first thing I would try would be to hover over that link to log in before I clicked it and see if it really went to paypal.com or not. Spoiler alert, it didn't in this case. Here's one that looks like it came from Microsoft. This is something that you would see as the owner of a Microsoft Office 365 account, which you all have. Unusual sign-in activity. This is telling someone that their account was logged into from Nigeria, which would be pretty concerning. But the thing in this case was that they also listed a 1-800 number you could call. That person on the other end of that 1-800 number is the hacker. They're going to impersonate Microsoft, make you feel comfortable, and then ask you, and they'll say, sure, well, I can secure your account right now. What was your old password? Let's change it. So then they walk you through changing your password, and then they've got your new one.
So where does that link go that says Microsoft.com?
That is a typed out URL that was then highlighted and hyperlinked to a phishing sign-in page. So speaking of phishing sign-in pages, people ask me sometimes, what's the danger in clicking a link if it doesn't actually download anything? Well, here's an example of what looks like the Google or Gmail sign-in page. Except what it actually is just a page that someone designed to look like that, but the URL is blurred out from the message board that I pulled this screenshot from. But the URL is definitely not google.com. The hacker made up this website and designed it behind the scenes to just send them anything typed into these fields. So you can try to log in with your correct information as many times as you want, but every time you hit sign in, it just sends them whatever you typed. So then they get a list of everything everyone ever tried to log into their site with, and then they can go and log into your real account on their own. Here's another one, but for Adobe. This kind of thing can look very, very convincing. You have to look at the top of the screen in the URL bar and make sure that the name of the website is exactly what it's supposed to be. When in doubt, do you have a question?
Sorry, but
Yeah.
if we're using our like the password, the stored passwords, and our computer wouldn't.
Your computer
catch
would
that.
not autofill it.
Right.
Right. The computer checks the URL to autofill. So if you're using a browser that does that, and you're quick enough to catch that it didn't autofill it, that's a red flag before you just say, oh, okay, whatever, it didn't autofill it, and you start typing. Think about why it didn't autofill. Right. So, moving on to another type of phishing scam, but not just a website, is something that's attached to an email. And this is something that you're vulnerable to also as a realtor, because if they know who you are, which they will, because you're all over the internet, they'll send you attachments. They'll send you something that looks like a qualification letter or something else that would be typical for you to get from someone who you haven't had a lot of correspondence with. And then when you open it up, it looks like this. Microsoft Word documents and other types of files, PDFs even, can contain executable code that will automatically do stuff other than just be a document. Whether that's install a virus on your computer or the same thing as the websites, send whatever you type. Documents themselves can be connected to the internet. They can have executable functions. So when you open up a document and it immediately asks you to do something, especially if it asks you to log in when you open a document, that should be an immediate red flag. This one in particular is a Word document, and Microsoft Word has security features built in to block that kind of code from automatically executing. So this document has instructions. It says, first, open the document. Previewing online does not work for protected documents. 2, if you downloaded this document from your email, please click Enable Editing in the yellow bar up top, which is a warning saying this could be dangerous. 3, once you've enabled editing, please hit Enable Content, which is another warning that says macros have been disabled. And so they're giving you instructions to manually allow their stuff to happen, just hoping that you've never been exposed to the fact that this could be bad. This is another case where if you're ever unsure, send it to me. I can open these things without risking anything and figure out really if they're legitimate or not. Beyond email, social media in the past couple of years has also crept up as an attack vector for this type of thing. And again, as a realtor, this is even more so for you because you're all over social media and you don't have your private messaging blocked and you want people to be talking to you, so you're just wide open to this. Here in the next few slides is going to be an example of another real story. This is a Facebook message that looks like it's a photo, but really it's an SVG file. It stands for Scalable Vector Graphic. You don't really need to know that, but anyway, it's not a picture. When you click on it, it then opens up to a file or a web page. like this. In this case, it's installing a extension into Google Chrome. Extensions are often perfectly legitimate. They can do things like show you coupons on websites if there's a discount code available, or block ads, or auto spell check, or stuff, whatever you want. But they can also be keyloggers that send every keystroke that you type while that web browser is open to the hacker. They can be Trojan viruses. They can be all sorts of. They can be anything, really. So you have to give it permission, but when you click this picture, it pops up and says you have to click this. You have to enable the extension to view it. So you say okay. Another one, another real example that happened, not to someone here, started through LinkedIn. Someone impersonated Wells Fargo and sent a message on LinkedIn, not because they thought the user was active on LinkedIn, because I don't think that many people are, especially not to check their direct messages all the time, but LinkedIn has a feature where whenever you get a direct message, it sends you an email. And this is what the email looks like. The email's not going to get filtered because it's going to really come from LinkedIn. Even though the account that messaged you is fake and probably would have gotten caught by a spam filter had they just emailed it, they send it to your LinkedIn account, LinkedIn sends it to your email, and now it shows up. So now, instead of just clicking this reply or not interested button, which would have been fine because this really did come from LinkedIn, you might just click this cabinet, whatever that word is, link, and go to a website that looks like this, which asks for your username, password, social security number, card number, full name, phone number, driver's license number, mother's maiden name, date of birth, email address, email password. People really fell for this. So, beyond this type of thing, there's another one that we've dealt with at Klein May that you've seen emails about from me, and that's what we call impersonation scams, kind of like this, where someone, for example, could impersonate Keith. They make an email address that looks like his, or if they're good enough, that looks exactly like his and really says it's from his exact email address, and says, "Hey, are you in the office today? I need a favor." And you say yes, and he says, "Okay, great. I'm starting an incentive-based program for agents. Could you go pick up 7 $500 iTunes gift cards, keep one for yourself because you're on the list, and then send me the other 6 codes. I'll reimburse you." And then it's Keith. You said, "Sure, I'll go do it." Even more specifically, teams get targeted with this kind of thing. The Harrisonburg Homes team has been targeted. They go online, they go to the website, they find out that Chris is the one that is the leader of the team that their people are going to listen to. They impersonate Chris. They email just the people on the Harrisonburg Homes team from Chris and say, "Hey, are you in the office today?" And they exploit your relationships because they've done research about you online.
Thankfully, we all hate Chris, so we don't.
Right, so no one ever actually fell for it because they just wouldn't have done it anyway had it even really been him. But
And they
I have.
tried to sound like cool in a way that Chris would never.
Right.
Like,
I have a video to play next, but before I do, I want to again reiterate how much you are targeted. We can track how often your email accounts have failed login attempts. And we can even track the IP address of the location where they are. And most of the time, any hacker worth his salt is going to mask his real location. But sometimes they don't, and we can see that this is happening from all over the world. On average, each of your email accounts has between 30 and 50 failed login attempts per day. There are programs and robots designed to scour the internet and spam login attempts, in addition to real people. Now, you're targeted like that in that sort of volume for a few reasons. One, you deal with a wide variety of people whom you form trusting relationships with on a short time frame, and you're dealing with huge amounts of money being sent by not always tech-savvy people. If you're a hacker and you're trying to exploit somebody, are you going to go after a big bank, a law firm, or a realtor? It's a pretty easy choice. So you have to be as vigilant as the big banks and the law firms because you're targeted just as much as they are, if not more. We've seen time and time again people lose hundreds of thousands of dollars just because they didn't see it coming and all they had was a Yahoo password, and the password was their name of their dog and their birth year. So, how can you protect yourself? I'm going to play a video from a former hacker for the NSA. He was what we call a black hat hacker. He was a criminal and then got hired by the NSA to instead work for them and help them counter these types of attacks. Make sure I get it.
So what's the top 5 things that you can do to make yourself more secure both at your business and your home? Number 1, use 2-factor authentication or 2-step verification everywhere that you can. Your banking systems, Twitter, Facebook, all support the ability for you to enable an additional security feature that you may not know. If you go to your settings, it's in there. You can enable it, and every time that you log in, it'll register your computer, and you can then get a text message to go into that system as a second form of verification. Why that's important is because if a hacker gets access to your password, they still have to have access to your phone to get access to your account. And that's really important by enabling that specific security step. Probably number 1. Number 2, don't use the same password everywhere. I know it's hard, but using the same password everywhere is one of probably the easiest ways that we break in as hackers. So if you have the same Twitter password as your same banking information, those are things that can get you in some serious trouble. Number 3, make sure that you stay up to date. Those security patches. Every time you have a Windows update that says, hey, I need to update your computer, it's usually to fix a known attack that hackers have figured out to get access to your computer. So keep up to date. Whether you're using a Mac, they aren't impervious to attack, or using Windows, same thing, update your systems. That's the most important thing. Always keep up to date with what you're having out there. Same thing for third-party applications. If you're using Java, Adobe, PDFs, Office documents, those are all things that you want to keep up to date, and that makes it much harder for us as hackers to break into your system. Number 4, social media. Be careful with how much information you actually put online. We as attackers can look at that. Look at what you do, your spending habits, what you might be doing from a day-to-day perspective, going and buying Starbucks at a certain location. Those are all things that we can use to identify when you're going to be out of the country or when you're going to be at a business meeting. We can use that as a method to attack you. One of the main things that we do as hackers, especially when it comes to social engineering, is we create a sense of urgency. Something that you're familiar with, but you have to take action upon. So let's just say, for example, I'm a Verizon customer and I have an Amazon package that's getting delivered. Well, if I, as an attacker, know an Amazon package is getting delivered, sending a text message from a Verizon customer support service line coming from Amazon saying, hey, your package is being rerouted, you need to log into this site to get it delivered again, is something that an attacker can use. So those are things that attackers can leverage is urgency, how you actually operate, and all that information that you post online are things that we can use as attacks. And last but not least, personal information. That's one of the biggest things that attackers can leverage to get access to your data. Things like social security numbers, your credit card numbers. A person is not going to call you on the phone from a banking service and ask you for that type of information. So whenever you get a call that's too good to be true, or a call that is a fraud services line, call them back. Look at the number on the website themselves and call it back. Because a lot of times attackers will impersonate financial services, they'll impersonate different organizations to try to get your personal information and use that to be able to make fraudulent charges. So when it comes to that, your phone, verify first. Go to their site, call the site itself from there, and then call to an actual person that's actually at that institute itself.
I'm a big fan of everything that was on that list. A couple things, I'm just going to go back so you don't have to look at the ads. A couple things that he mentioned there that sometimes present hardships are enabling two-factor authentication on everything, and that even your personal accounts that John and I don't have control over. Facebook, all social media, your banking, everything that gives you the option should be turned on. And the other big one that most people avoid because it's too difficult is using different passwords for everything. There's let me just get a show of hands. How many people use the same password for more than 3 things? The vast majority.
Spencer, could you respond to using a standard form, but each one's a little different?
It's obviously not as secure as completely random passwords, because if a hacker realizes what your scheme is, if they're lucky enough to just get just 2 of them and realize your scheme, they could guess more should they have the motivation to do so. It's better than having the same one, but I'd place it in between.
So can you introduce to us the best tool to use to keep track of all your passwords? Because most of us probably have 30 or 40, if not 100.
Yeah, that's where I was going next.
I'm a good straight man.
You have a couple of options to help you remember passwords if memorizing them all is too much, which it is for everybody. If you're on, depending on what type of computer you have and what web browser you use, you might have this function already built in to the stuff that you use. If you're on a Mac, Keychain is built in and it'll remember everything. Even if you're not, if you use Google Chrome, Chrome can remember your passwords and save them to your Google account. That's a really bad idea if you don't have good 2-factor authentication on your Google account that you're signed into Chrome with. Because then if they hack that, they've got all your other passwords as well. So they're all only as secure as the weakest link. But it is a good way to store your passwords. Even beyond that, if you want to save passwords for third-party applications and stuff outside of one computer or one web browser, a lot of people like to just keep an offline document, a spreadsheet or a Word document, and then put a password on it. If you'd like to get that set up, we can meet one-on-one and I can walk you through the process later on. But you can put a master password onto a document like that so that even if someone stole your computer, they couldn't get in. There are also applications that can do that autofill feature that Google Chrome does, but for anything. The 2 that I recommend are LastPass and Dashlane. There's also one called 1Password, which is just as good. I don't think any of them are free, but they're great. They'll store all your passwords in the cloud. Application runs in the background. Anytime you log into something, it'll save it. It's really convenient. It works just like Keychain does on a Mac. That's, again, though, if that's something that you're thinking to yourself, man, yeah, I do need to change some of my passwords, and you're not confident in doing it on your own, I'd be happy to meet with any and all of you one-on-one and go through your accounts and make sure that they're all secure.
Can I put a plug-in for 1Password? My wife and I do use 1Password, and it's not only just like a password keeper. You can also store all your credit card information in there, and then that will autofill in those stupid websites that ask you for all your credit card information but won't leave it on the website. It's stored there. So like you can override that. Like, so if I would go to Amazon right now on my phone, Amazon's not stored on my phone with Keychain. It's actually stored through 1Password, and then it can do all the same information and log into Amazon for me, and then also log all the credit card information into there, and then come back out. And we pay for that every month because. So my wife works for a tech company, so I think we have like a pretty premium plan. I think it's $19.99 a month, but I think you can buy a $4.99 plan that doesn't have to be. I think we have over 300 passwords stored in there, and all of them are randomized, so there's not a single password that is something that I would make up. 1Password is actually doing that work for me, and then randomizing.
If you're not the one who has to remember it and type it in, there's no reason not to let the computer auto-generate a 32-digit completely random thing.
Right.
That it'll just autofill anyway. A couple more tips beyond what he listed there in the video, are to always keep a current backup. Another show of hands, how many people have a backup of their computer within the last 24 hours? Within the last week? This is important mainly for two reasons. One, because you could spill coffee on your computer or it could be stolen. And if there's anything on there that doesn't exist anywhere else, you're out of luck. Two, because of ransomware. Ransomware is one of the possibilities that you open yourself up to if you fall for any of the attacks that we've been talking about earlier. Basically, it's a type of virus that locks your computer, encrypts all of your data, and then to unlock it, all you need is a password. The hacker contacts you and offers to sell you the password. That's why they call it ransomware. If that happens to you, the FBI has made formal statements advising people usually to just pay the ransom. If you care about what's on the computer, you should just pay it. Or, if you have a backup, you can just wipe off the computer and restore your backup. And then you're fine again. It's very important. Carbonite is the service I recommend if you want a cloud-based backup. It's, I think, $60 or so a year. It just runs in the background and constantly keeps an up-to-date backup. You can go buy a new computer, throw the one you have in the lake, and just sign back into Carbonite on the new computer, and it'll dump everything back on, look like it did the day before. The next thing that is a little bit on the extreme side, although I don't say that in a bad way, I just don't think it's always necessary, is a VPN. It stands for Virtual Private Network. And essentially, VPNs are services that have encrypted servers all over the world. And instead of your computer just talking directly to the website that you're currently using, the VPN creates this private encrypted pathway for your data to flow through on its way there so that no one can intercept it in between. It also prevents websites from tracking your browsing history and your real-world location and stuff like that. VPNs are very cheap, like $2 a month. If that's something that interests you, I'd be happy to help set one up. But like I said, that's a little more on the complicated side.
So, are there negatives? I mean, why wouldn't everybody just do this and eliminate a lot of those threats?
There are some negatives. Namely, it can interrupt connectivity with things like office printers. If you have devices that talk to each other, it can slow you down somewhat depending on the VPN server that you're connected to. It also restricts websites from knowing where you are, which some people like, but it can take away features like Google Maps knowing where you are, or the weather site that you go to knowing where you are. If you try to log into a secure website like your bank and you're on a VPN, they're going to think that you're trying to log in from Indiana when you just tried to log in from Seattle 5 minutes before because your VPN is moving you around, and you might get your account flagged and locked because they think it's fraud. That kind of thing. So depending on what you're doing, it can cause...
Would it cause you to always have to be doing two-factor? Because every time you log into something, it thinks you're somewhere else?
Usually depends on the account, but often, yeah.
Two things. Does Carbonite pose the same problems regarding location?
No.
No. And or printer interruption, that kind of flow?
No. The only downside to Carbonite is that you have to be connected to the internet for it to work. Because it backs up to Carbonite's servers. So if you're offline and working and you make changes and something happens to your computer before you've connected and had a chance to sync up, you would have lost anything since the last time you were connected.
How about an external hard drive? Is that just too antiquated
No,
for you?
it's not. It just requires manual effort. You have to remember to plug it in and tell it to do its thing.
Okay.
So I gave this list in May as well, but I'll show it again now. I worked up a weekly checklist that you can try to get yourself into the habit of doing that will form good routines for you to prevent most of this stuff. I mention check available disk space first, not because it's the most important, but because it's something to stay on top of if you're going to be running updates. So I mentioned those first two things just to make sure your computer isn't overrun. Updates is the first important thing. And like he said in the video, most of the time when your computer is telling you it needs to update, and you're thinking, I just updated, are you again? It's because they identified another vulnerability and they fixed it. You're going to be vulnerable until you update. You should never put those off unless you absolutely cannot go 5 minutes without your computer right then at that moment. So at least weekly, check for updates on your computer and any major apps that you use. Restart your computer afterwards. Run a malware scan. If you don't have it, if I've never told you about it, Malwarebytes is free, and that's the program I recommend for running manual malware scans. Restart again if it found it, and then make sure that you have a current backup. At least weekly, you should be doing all of these things. Any questions about anything on this list?
No, but I'm taking it.
Okay.
At what point do you not have enough disk space when you're checking that?
I'd say if your hard drive is more than 95% full.
Wow, it can go that far.
You should start. Yeah. It used to be that when your hard drive got full, it started slowing down. Even as it got towards full, 80-90%, it would affect performance. Nowadays, computers come with solid-state drives, not manual hard drives that actually spin and have magnetic disks. And solid-state drives are just fundamentally different in that whether it's 5 or 95%, it's not going to affect the performance. So, the last point that I'll make is how to educate your clients about this kind of thing. I think that it's a conversation you should have with them right up front. At your very first meeting, depending on what kind of meeting that is, but at least at the first time you're sitting down and talking to them for any significant length of time, you should let them know, we are going to have to deal with this. You are now, because you're entering into this process, because you're going to start corresponding with a realtor and with a bank and with a title agency, you're going to be targeted by online criminals. And you can phrase that however you'd like, tailored to the personality of your client, but you need to let them know that they need to be careful. Ask them if they have two-factor authentication on their email. Make sure that you understand it enough to explain it to them if they don't. Ask them if they get any suspicious emails to forward them to you so that you can check them out or forward them to me. And if anything suspicious does happen, I would be happy at any time to sit down with you and your client and make sure that they're comfortable that nothing is happening. I'd much rather take the time to do that than get an email the next day that says, hey, we've been dealing with this and it turns out that my client just wired money to San Francisco.
Here's the problem. A lot of those do not even seem suspicious.
Right. That's why I spent so much time this morning giving so many examples of how they go about doing this kind of thing.
And one rule of thumb for the clients is anything that has to do with money.
Yeah.
Verify face-to-face or over the phone.
That you initiate.
With a phone number that you initiate.
Right, yeah.
And we do that here too, internally, transfer money between companies and whatnot, because it's too easy to be fooled.
I've also started, anytime I'm sending something for electronic signature, I also text to say I'm getting ready to send you this, so that they're aware.
Yeah.
That, so that it's not from somebody else.
Right.
That they're signing something.
And later on, if they get one and they don't get a text, they'll be a little worried. Yeah.
So last evening at 8 o'clock, I got a text from Capital One saying, you just purchased this amount at BestBuy.com. Reply with, is this yes you did or no you didn't? And I'm like, oh, that's got to be a scam. Like, I'm losing it. Like, I'm not answering that, and I'm deleting it out of my phone. In the meantime, my husband, he's standing beside me, he said, well, hold on, I'm gonna go to our account. He goes in on his phone to our account, and there was that charge on our account. And then he receives an email that says, here's this account, but neither me nor him did it. Here's this account, is it, reply yes or no through email.
Right.
I'm thinking, how does Capital One know to text me and email my husband? And I was like, starting to freak out. And here it was for real. It was neither me nor my husband, but it was an employee of mine that went in with the card and purchased something, and they was holding him up. And Joe Wilson or I agreed to it. It was interesting how that all happened, but for me to get a text, I have never gotten a text from Capital One before.
Well,
and then Wilson got the email. That was new. I've never received a text from Capital One.
Maybe Wilson, are you actually asked for that? Because I have that set up on my credit card. If anything is spent over like nominal amount, I do get a text or an email.
Our company card has been hacked so many times. Keith now gets a text.
Yeah.
And any of us use a
that was
company
the
card
first one
for
from
anything.
Capital One that I got. Wilson always gets the emails, but I've never received text. So now
I had to go to my account and ask for that, but like set it up. I wonder if.
So now I'm just getting texts. I'm like, oh, okay.
That's helpful.
It is. I mean, after we figured out it wasn't a scam, that I was like, okay, that's awesome that they're letting us know. But the text just come from like a 227 number. It was very interesting text. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, you just never know.
Spencer, can you speak to one of the comments that I hear when I have these conversations with people is, well, if there's so much concern about wire fraud, then why can't we just use cashier's checks? Because that's the easiest solution around that. And that has now been stymied by, more often than not, title companies are saying that they will not accept cashier's checks over a specific value. And I'm currently working with one where that specific value is anything over $1,000. They will only accept a wire.
Wow.
I can't speak as to why they insist on that.
How can we help? I mean, that the obvious sense of security is, okay, if I'm in so much danger by wiring, why don't I just do something more secure like a cashier's check? And now my title company is telling me that I can't do that even. They prefer me to go the riskier route. Why are they forcing me into a riskier?
It seems the title company doesn't think that wire fraud is the risk, or the wiring in general is the riskier route. It seems like they are operating under the assumption that it's easier to commit fraud with a cashier's check than it is with a wire. I'm not sure I'd agree with that, but that's certainly their opinion if that's what they're insisting on. You'd have to ask them as to why.
Has anybody heard any rationale from a title company about that?
On their end, it wouldn't be more insecure. You know what I mean? For them, they're the ones receiving the money. It's always more secure for them, not for the client.
I've heard is it Clark and Bradshaw will not accept cashier's check.
No, this is a remote.
I have a personal relationship with Clark and Bradshaw, so I'll be glad to ask that question.
I'd love to know what they say.
I'll ask.
Because it's even here. And I think the threshold here is $100,000.
Yeah, I remember that we talked about that with Title Alliance in their first intro meeting. Well, at least the first one I was there for. We talked for a while about how big of a deal it is for them.
Right.
And they deal with it nationwide. They had the same horror stories that we had.
I mean, I guess as this is brought up, it would come to my mind that if title companies don't think this is a problem, it looks like there would be more possibility for, if they're not receiving the same training that you're doing with us, it just looks like this would be an even bigger issue with incorrect information or scams coming.
I think so too, and I think that they are, I would hope that they are training their employees to some extent. I know that they do know how big of an issue it is, at least the ones I've talked to. the senior level reps from the home office in Pennsylvania, from Title Alliance, who we were talking to, were very knowledgeable about
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
Talked about it like they were terrified.
At least would it make sense to have some kind of document that we share with our clients with, like, no, I'm saying access numbers to, like, if you get a request, use this number to contact
Sure.
Westview Title, you know, like
Yeah.
that, because it is kind of a pain for them to have to try it, especially somebody who's not really savvy about
Right.
this kind of thing.
I think
to
the
figure
rule
out
of
what to do.
the rule of thumb is to verify any communication that has to do with the transfer of money.
Mm-hmm.
And by verify, I mean contact the appropriate person via a contact method that you know to be legitimate. Whether that means you have a conversation with them at the start and say, just so we're clear, this is the accurate phone number and email address for our title agent. This is the accurate phone number and email address for me. And I think that would be a good idea to just establish right off the bat.
I've told people to call me, don't call anyone else
Yeah.
but me. And then
Just
one of
call
my clients had a really good idea, which I haven't came up with yet. He's like, oh, he was kind of joking, but he's like, do we have a code word? And, but it's not a bad idea. Because I could say, call me, and you know how it is, where you could think you're getting a call from Debbie and it's some crazy telemarketer. I'm assuming there's some other way to do that where they could be calling me and my numbers could be rerouted.
Yeah.
And they could say, hey, we got this, and that other person could say, oh yeah, that's correct, unless you have a code word.
Well, for example, has your phone ever rang and you look at it and it's your phone number?
Oh, no, that's not happening.
Yeah.
So what?
That's not too hard to do.
Okay, see.
But I've had the calls
Spencer?
from Debbie's calling me, and so I answer, hey Debbie, what can I help you with? And it's someone trying to sell me a cruise, you know, or something like that.
That's
So-
why instead of saying, wait for me to call you, when you're asking them to verify this thing, make them
Make
initiate
them call you. Yeah,
the contact.
yeah. But that's what I'm saying. I'm thinking there's probably eventually going to be a way where hackers already know my number and they can reroute that to somewhere else. So.
Oh. Yeah, being able to intercept the call and make your phone not ring and make theirs ring, even though the client dialed your phone number, is a little bit out there for now.
Yeah, no,
Who
it's
knows
all
what
out
they're
there.
going to be able to do?
But the code word I thought was interesting.
Yeah.
Not a bad idea.
I just wanted to know if that piece of literature is going to be available to us.
This is in .loop.
Okay, cool. Okay.
There's another form that I've been using, and I don't know where it came from, but it's in .loop. I don't know if it's a part of, I don't know where it's from, but it basically has that wire fraud conversation, and then the buyer or the seller signs it that you have had that conversation with them. I know it's in the bottom of the contract. I know it's in the contract, but there's 15 pages of stuff you're talking to them about, and then this is just another way of remember that conversation.
It's a good
that
line
you had.
item.
And
Bring it
that
up again.
separate form has an extra line on there that says we're not responsible.
Yes, you're exactly right. Yep.
Should we add it to the buyer?
I've been using it.
warranty?
It's good just to have that conversation.
That's a good idea too.
Yeah.
What's it under? What's the name? What's the head?
It's called wire fraud something.
This one I think is called Financial Scams.
Yeah, but
In
then the
.loop
form.
is the name of it. The form, I'm not sure.
it's-
I didn't create it.
You'll know when you see it, you'll know what it is.
But you can search on scam and find it.
Right.
Yeah, I think the one you're talking about is Virginia Realtor's form. So
Yeah.
It's called what?
Yeah.
Fraud disclosure or something.
Yeah,
like
if
that.
you just search fraud or wire in .loop, it'll pop up. Any other questions?
You want to mention that text that we got supposedly from the school?
Yeah.
That was a new one on me.
So I didn't talk about texting scams too much, often because they're a lot easier to identify because you don't get nearly as many texts from unknown sources. But recently, a text went out to the parents list at J. Frank Hilliard Middle School.
Wow.
And all it said was click.
I got it.
Link.
Anybody else got it?
Okay, so other schools too.
Oh, for spot school.
It was the whole county.
The whole county.
All the county.
And it was a link to a Google Doc.
Yeah.
And it turned out to not be malicious. I guess it was just an employee who didn't know what they were doing.
Yes.
But it could have been, had the school system gotten hacked or had an employee had gotten hacked, they could have texted out any link. That link could have been any of these types of attacks that we were talking about. And so they sent out that link, and then they sent another one that said, sorry, that was the wrong link, now click this one. And then a few minutes later, a text came from the principal of J. Frank Hilliard, or at least that's the one he got, and it said, we don't think that was from us, please don't click it.
Right.
I didn't get that.
So, because I let my husband know immediately, and he checked, and it was legitimate. It was
Right.
just
Yeah.
And I didn't do it
Yeah.
either, but I
If
didn't
you
get the
get
follow-up.
So-
a text from an unknown
Since I selected the
person,
decline and block this number, that means I'm not going to get notification from the school.
Lucky.
Right. If
Right.
you
Yeah,
have that
So
setting
how-
turned on,
how,
you're
how,
not
do I,
gonna-
how do I undo that? Because I have a feeling I'm going to need to hear about the 2-hour delay tomorrow morning.
Right. Right.
It's in settings, either under phone or under messages. If you have an iPhone, if it's on Android, I don't know off the top of my head. We can meet on it if you want, and it's on Android. But on an iPhone, you go to settings, and then for phone calls, it's under phone, and there's a setting called block unknown callers or don't notify unknown callers, something like that, having to do with the unknown callers. And when you have it enabled, your phone won't ring if the number isn't in your contacts. You'll get a message that you have a missed call or a voicemail, but it won't ring and it won't notify you as it's happening. Same for text. You're on an iPhone, you have a separate tab for unknown senders, and it doesn't give you a notification. You just see the little one next time you happen to be looking at it.
So how many hours do we need with you as a one-on-one? Because I need that with you. So how many hours do I need to schedule out?
If you want to do a comprehensive audit and we change all your passwords and we verify all your devices, a couple hours.
Spencer, you might just as well block off between now and like January 1.
This is the time of year to do it.
But what you can all do now, if you're one of those people like I used to be that uses the same password for everything, including my bank, change that one right away.
Yeah.
Okay.
Carl, I'm a 1Password girl, and it is everything. Everything.
At
Don't
at
tell
least
the whole world.
your
And what is it?
I know your pet's name and your
Yeah.
husband.
I know.
You're not the only one.
Right. I was that way too.
You have a new nickname.
Spencer, I know it's bad.
Vulnerable.
But I can't remember that one.
Well, shit.
I'm serious. No, it's bad.
Lisa, I'm with you. I
It's so bad. I mean, that one. I am freaking out. This is not.
What we'll have to do is
you're
set
on a
you up
Mac.
on a system like
Yeah.
Dashlane or LastPass, and then you do have to have one master password for those programs. But we'll tattoo it on the back of your hand or something. So that
So my concern with those is, it would seem like those companies would be targeted
Yes.
significantly.
Yes.
they are, but the successful ones are successful because they have security that has been tested and has stood up.
Okay.
How about
I just-
Keychain? Is that
iCloud, yeah, Keychain is the one that's built into Macs.
And so, has that ever been hacked? Or
You remember when
compromised?
you remember when that criminal's iPhone was admitted to evidence and the FBI couldn't crack it?
Oh, right.
That's the level of security that we're talking about.
Yeah, but somebody did.
Now,
Supposedly somebody did.
So we need to all go by Max?
Yeah.
Is that what I'm hearing? That's
Well,
what
the
I'm
thing about the Mac is, if you have an iPhone, it all syncs. It saves your password here. If you go to that site on your iPhone, you just hit your passwords list and it comes
Yeah, but
right up.
Google does that too.
Yeah, so whatever you use, you can, or a program like 1Password, if you have something automated that does that, then you can just accept all these random suggestions and not care what they are.
Yeah, there are ways to do it on any device. It's just default and easy on a Mac is all. But you can do it on Windows and Android as well.
now when you're saying on a Mac, you mean a Mac laptop as opposed to an iOS device?
Yeah, when I say Mac, I mean computer.
Yeah, okay.
I have just a quick thought on back to the wire fraud thing.
Yeah.
Every now and then I'll get an email with a contract from another agent in this office or any office, doesn't matter. There'll be a copy of the earnest money deposit check in there, like an actual scanned copy, which for a long time, I never thought anything of, that's nice, they're sending that, so I know it was turned in. I've done that before. Obviously, the problem with that is now we're transferring a routing number and an account number over email. So if our email ever got hacked, any archived document in there that has a check in it, whether it's a scanned document, PDF, JPEG, whatever, is now available to anyone. So I just had that thought a couple weeks ago and was like, okay, if I need to send a copy of the earnest money deposit check to a lender, to a title agent, to a client, to another agent, I'm printing a copy of it and blacking out the numbers and then sending that copy. So I don't know how many people think about that in here, but I just thought I'd throw that out since that's kind of a common occurrence.
And another note on that process as well is that sending it over email is not the only vulnerable point in that process. The reason we changed the Wi-Fi password a while ago and made a guest network and asked you not to give out the password to our Klein May network is because someone on our Wi-Fi could intercept that signal between the scanner and your computer. When you're scanning something and sending it to yourself, or when you're sending something to print from your computer to the printer, someone on our Wi-Fi network who knew what they were doing sitting out in the parking lot could intercept that data.
Now, if we did that on a PDF form, can someone who's savvy take out the, blacked in?
If you use the PDF, just built-in redaction.
You have to physically do it with a marker.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what
It
I was
depends
so
on
you would have
depends
to-
on how you do it.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Zach's exactly right. We should never be sending checks that you haven't taken a good solid Sharpie and blocked up those numbers.
So,
And in the event that one ends up in my inbox, my immediate response is I'm deleting that and it's gone forever, so that if it ever was hacked, it's not there.
so are we not, as part of the transaction process, is Katie no longer requesting a copy of the earnest money deposit?
You can send a copy, just black out the routing number in the.
But when I'm asking when I'm asking a agent from another company to send me a copy of the earnest money deposit, I mean, we're still doing that. That's to my knowledge, that's something she still requires, is a copy of the earnest money deposit, even though the agent
No, just a signature on page 9.
Right.
Realtor
Saying that
signature
I haven't
is
had to
good
do
enough.
that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
The title company, I get requests from the title company to have a copy of the escrow deposit. I get numerous.
From the
Yeah,
title?
yeah. from
Yeah,
the-
for folks say
They
that.
all are asking.
I'm the
for it.
bank.
But usually what they'll want is a copy of it being deposited, so a receipt from the bank that Katie puts in the loop.
Yeah.
And often that always has the start out numbers on it and everything, so that's perfectly safe to send.
Is there any way that we have capability to send encrypted emails? Sorry, I was out of it for a minute, but I have lots of insurance guy or my investment or whoever.
Yeah.
If it's sensitive information, they'll send it to me in an encrypted email, or I have to do something to get logged
It's
in.
it's not something that you can do with a couple of clicks by default. We have to generate a certificate on your computer to be able to do that. But if it's something that you have a need for, we can meet and I can enable it for you. Yeah.
By enable it, you mean then I could use it on a regular basis, or
Yeah.
it's gonna be like a whole process every time?
No, I can make it so that you could do it on a regular basis, but that would have to be probably a 30-minute meeting to make it happen on each computer. And then if you work off multiple devices, if we set it up on your computer, you're not going to be able to do it from your phone, that kind of thing.
There's been a few instances where it would have been handy to be able to send something in encrypted email, so I would sleep better at night. But I never knew how to do it, how better do it.
Right. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, I'll hand it over to Paul for the business success planning meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
I think there's more bagels and cookies if anyone wants to grab those on the way out.
Thanks.